In episode 38, titled Spaced Review, Data Analysis Methods and Messaging Under Exam Pressure, the goal is a rapid recall workout that keeps analysis choices and communication habits ready when the clock is running. Exam pressure tends to shrink attention, so the mind benefits from short, repeated cues that bring the right concept forward without rummaging through notes. This review treats messaging and method selection as one linked skill, because the best calculation still fails if it is explained poorly, and the cleanest explanation still fails if it rests on the wrong approach. The pace is intentionally brisk, but the intent remains careful, because confidence comes from knowing what to do first, what to say first, and what to verify before a conclusion hardens. Audience tailoring begins with a simple reminder: clarity is not simplification, and detail is a dial rather than a fixed setting. A technical listener often needs mechanism and evidence, while a non-technical listener often needs decision context and impact, yet both groups deserve the same factual core. Detail shifts based on urgency and consequence, because high-stakes decisions require defensible boundaries, while urgent decisions may require a timely estimate with clearly stated limits. Internal messages can carry diagnostic depth, while external messages must respect sensitivity and avoid unnecessary operational disclosure, which changes how the same truth is framed. Under pressure, the fast check is whether the message fits the listener's responsibility, because a mismatch in detail level is one of the quickest ways to lose trust even when the numbers are right. KPI framing stays grounded by remembering that a key performance indicator is a metric tied to action, not a number chosen because it is easy to compute or looks impressive on a dashboard. The fastest exam-ready move is starting with the business question, then choosing a measure that answers it directly, rather than backing into a question that fits a convenient metric. A baseline gives movement meaning, because up and down are empty without a reference that matches seasonality and definitions. Rates require numerator and denominator alignment, because misaligned populations create correct arithmetic that tells the wrong story. The recall cue is that an actionable metric has a stable definition, a clear owner, and a known response when it moves beyond an agreed boundary. Selecting a statistical approach is a question-matching exercise, where descriptive, inferential, predictive, and prescriptive methods each answer a different kind of ask. Descriptive work summarizes what already happened, which is often the right choice when the question is about recent performance or current state. Inferential work generalizes from a sample to a population, and it becomes appropriate when sampling is unavoidable and uncertainty must be expressed honestly. Predictive work estimates likely future outcomes using signals, and it requires discipline about validation and timing so performance is real rather than accidental. Prescriptive work recommends actions under constraints, which requires explicit objectives and constraints, not just a forecast. And the recall cue is that the method family should match the claim being made. Mean, median, and mode remain the fastest central tendency tools, but the choice depends on data shape and what typical is intended to mean. The mean is useful when values are roughly balanced and symmetric because it reflects the whole dataset smoothly and supports comparisons that track broad shifts. The median resists outliers, so it represents a typical case better when long tails or rare extremes would otherwise pull the mean into a value few cases actually resemble. The mode fits repeated values and categories, making it a natural choice when most common is the real question, rather than typical magnitude. Under exam pressure, the quick heuristic is to check for skew and outliers mentally, because those conditions often flip the correct choice from mean to median while leaving the computation itself deceptively easy. Variance and standard deviation are recall-friendly when framed as how predictable is the process, because spread often matters as much as center. Variance can be remembered as the average squared distance from the mean, which is a way to measure variation without positive and negative differences canceling each other out. Standard deviation returns that spread to original units, which makes it easier to interpret in plain terms like days, dollars, or minutes, and it can be spoken as standard deviation, SD, on first mention when that abbreviation appears. Larger spread means less consistency, and two groups can share the same average while one group produces far more volatile outcomes that drive complaints and risk. The exam cue is that dispersion often explains why stakeholders feel a process is unreliable even when the average looks stable. Function families are the practical glue that turns raw fields into measures, and the main recall point is that most errors come from chaining without checking meaning at each step. Mathematical functions support totals, ratios, rounding, and scaling, while logical functions label conditions that define scope and categories, and date functions create windows and time differences that match business rhythm. String functions standardize text so keys and categories match cleanly across sources, which prevents silent fragmentation in grouping and joining. Null handling sits inside every family because null is not zero, and missing values can propagate through calculations to create large downstream ambiguity. Under pressure, the fastest safeguard is to treat null treatment as a definition decision rather than a default, because different interpretations of unknown values can create correct answers that disagree. Connectivity troubleshooting stays calm when it follows first checks that reduce uncertainty quickly rather than jumping to deep explanations too soon. Credentials, permissions, and lockouts often fail first, and a failure there can look like a network issue if the only visible symptom is denial or repeated authentication failure. Network basics matter next, including domain name system, DNS behavior, routes, and firewall allowance, because name resolution and reachability decide whether the destination can be found at all. Endpoint details like the correct address, port, and service availability can drift over time, which can make a working integration appear suddenly down even when the service is healthy elsewhere. The recall cue is to separate cannot reach from reached but wrong, because connectivity failures and corrupted returns require different evidence and different fixes. Issue handling with user reports becomes reliable when logs and source validation lead the investigation instead of guessing at query logic. Logs establish what changed and when, which narrows root causes to a window where releases, rotations, outages, or schema updates may have occurred. Source validation confirms whether upstream data changed in volume, completeness, or definition, because many reporting query problems are actually input changes that SQL faithfully reflects. Reproducing the issue on a small, controlled sample turns an argument into a test, because a single record can be traced through joins and filters to show exactly why it appears or disappears. The fast recall is that a fix that bypasses source validation may look like progress, but it often becomes a brittle patch that fails again when the next upstream change lands. Two-sentence summaries work as a pressure tool because they force the analyst to state the finding and its meaning without hiding behind terminology. Sign-ups decreased week over week because fewer visitors reach the checkout step, and the drop is concentrated in mobile traffic. The data appears complete for the period, and counts match the source totals, so the change is likely behavioral rather than a missing data artifact. Those two sentences show a pattern worth copying. One sentence ties the observation to a plausible driver, and one sentence anchors confidence using a simple validation claim. When practicing this move, the main constraint is avoiding vague words like weird or off because they invite debate instead of action. Under exam conditions, this style earns points because it answers what changed, why it matters, and what supports the claim. Explaining uncertainty cleanly is another pressure skill because uncertainty must be honest without sounding evasive or unprepared. This estimate is directionally reliable, but the range is wider than usual because a portion of mobile events arrived late and may revise the final count. We see the pattern across 3 regions, which increases confidence, but we cannot claim causation because the change aligns with a release and could reflect instrumentation differences. These statements keep uncertainty specific, tied to known limits like missingness, timing, or definition boundaries, rather than vague caveats that weaken credibility. They also preserve decisiveness by indicating what is known and what remains bounded, which helps stakeholders choose whether action can proceed now or needs confirmation. Under pressure, the recall cue is to name one concrete limit and one concrete support, because that combination sounds both candid and competent. 3 communication pitfalls recur because they derail clarity even when the analysis is correct. Drowning the listener in detail, using jargon that forces translation, and implying certainty where the data cannot support it. Over-detail breaks the message thread, especially when comparisons shift definition midstream, because the audience stops tracking what is stable and what changed. Jargon creates distance, and it often sounds like defensiveness, so plain language that preserves meaning usually lands better under time pressure. False certainty is especially damaging because it turns normal analytical uncertainty into a trust breach when later revisions occur, and those revisions are common when late-arriving data, merges, or definition updates are involved. The recall move is to keep one clear claim, one supporting evidence point, and one boundary statement, because that structure prevents all 3 pitfalls at once. Targeted review planning works best when it ends with a focused set of concepts to revisit, chosen because they are easy to confuse under speed rather than because they are hard in theory. Many learners benefit from revisiting the difference between descriptive and inferential claims because both can look like summary work while carrying very different uncertainty obligations. Another high-yield revisit is join behavior and grain, because row multiplication can hide inside correct-looking outputs and then surface as double counting when totals are aggregated again. A third common revisit area is null handling and rate definition, because numerator and denominator misalignment plus inconsistent missing value treatment can produce persuasive but wrong comparisons. Under exam pressure, the best revisits are the ones that prevent silent errors, because silent errors are the hardest to catch after the fact. The conclusion of episode 38 sets a 5-minute mix drill for tomorrow that blends method choice with messaging, so recall stays integrated instead of fragmented. One short scenario can be used, such as a weekly metric change, and the drill is to classify the question as descriptive, inferential, predictive, or prescriptive. Then choose one KPI definition with aligned numerator and denominator. The next step is to state a 2-sentence finding in plain language, followed by a 1-sentence uncertainty boundary that names a real limit like missingness, timing, or definition drift. A final pass adds one validation statement using counts, totals, or a small sample trace, because evidence is what makes the message durable. Repeating this compact sequence builds the exact reflex the exam rewards, choosing the right approach, protecting meaning, and communicating with calm precision. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.